Hey there. Tonight, we're not stepping into a history book. We're stepping into it by accident. You've time travelled to medieval England. No warning, no guidebook. Just the cold, the mud, and the strange stares of people who know you don't belong. This isn't the world of knights and legends. This is the world of chamber pots, spoiled bread, and social rules that could get you flogged if you bow wrong. You'll fumble through languages, lose your bag, and pretend to know saints you've never heard of, all just to survive another day. If quiet, immersive history helps you unwind, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if it brings you some peace. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always oddly comforting to see how far these stories travel. So dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan, and settle in. Let's begin with you, waking up in the wrong century. You wake up to silence, not the digital kind, not the hum of appliances or the faint buzz of a city outside your window, but real, pressing, unnerving silence. The kind of silence that belongs to a place without electricity, without traffic, without time. A heavy, unyielding quiet, broken only by the distant rustle of leaves and the hollow hoot of a nightbird. Your hands are cold. The air is damp. You're lying in dirt. You sit up slowly, heart hammering with a strange mix of confusion and dread. It's dark. Not night in the city dark, but pitch. Total absence of light. Your eyes strain. Eventually shapes begin to form. Trees, moss, maybe a distant flicker of firelight between crooked branches. You reach for your phone. No service, no signal. Just 3% battery and a lock screen that suddenly feels like the last connection to your own world. You try to breathe. Then you notice the smell. Earthy, smoky, not exactly unpleasant, just unfamiliar. The air carries wood smoke, wet leaves, manure, and something musky you can't quite place. It's the smell of a world that hasn't been sanitized. Congratulations. You're not in Kansas anymore. You're in the English countryside. And, judging by the absence of stone roads, fences, or chimneys, you're several hundred years too early. You're in medieval England, probably the 14th century. You don't know how you got here. The time machine joke is long past funny. Now, you need a plan. First rule, don't panic. Second rule, don't let anyone see you arrive. In the medieval world, people weren't necessarily terrified of strangers, but they were very interested in them. And if your clothing, speech, or behaviour marks you as too foreign, too different, you won't get burned as a witch, probably, but you will be talked about, questioned, and possibly robbed. Or worse, forced into some story you can't control. So you move quietly. The forest around you is thick, but not untouched. These aren't wild woods. They've been cut, scavenged, managed. Medieval England's forests weren't untouched nature preserves. They were heavily used for firewood, for hunting by nobles, for gathering mushrooms and berries by peasants if allowed. But most forest land was owned. Every twig had a price. If you're caught breaking branches or dragging wood, and you can't prove you're a tenant of the local lord, it could be considered theft. And in this era, theft could get your hand chopped off. You walk toward the glow of a town, still hidden among the trees. The lights are few, a smattering of torches or maybe hearth fires showing through crude wooden shutters. There are no street lamps, no windows of glass, just wooden planks with slits or animal hide stretched thin. Light leaks, flickers, then vanishes. As you get closer, you find the road. It's not paved, not even cobbled, just packed mud, scored by cart ruts and pocked with puddles. Medieval roads weren't designed for comfort. They were functional scars across the land, often flooded, slippery and worse after a freeze. You try to keep your footing, but already your shoes, sleek, modern, unmistakable, are coated in grime. You take them off. Hide them. Your socks go too. Clothing matters. You're wearing materials they've never seen. Synthetic fibres. Zippers. Stitching machines hadn't been invented. If you walk into town in jeans and a sweatshirt, you're an alien, no matter how friendly you try to be. Best case scenario, they think you're from a faraway land. Worst case, they think you're an escaped lunatic. So you do what any prudent time traveller would. Bury your clothes in the woods. Tuck your phone deep into your bag. Tie your hoodie around a tree. Strip down to a thermal undershirt. It almost passes for a linen tunic. You pull your hair into something vaguely rustic. You rub a little dirt on your face and practice looking underfed. There's a town gate ahead. You approach it just before dawn. Towns in this period often had gates not to keep people in, but to keep animals and thieves out. Many had curfews, often marked by the ringing of a bell at sundown. After dark, entry was restricted unless you had a very good reason. If you'd arrived earlier, you might have been turned away or even fined. But now, as first light creeps in, soft blue and pink across the frost-touched earth, the town begins to stir. You enter with a small group of people, traders, peasants, maybe pilgrims. No one notices you. The street is narrow, muddy. Houses lean at odd angles. They're timber-framed, wattle and daub, meaning wooden slats packed with mud and straw. The roofs are thatched. The air smells like firewood and animal waste. Chickens dart across the path. You almost step on one. People here sleep differently. Most take a first sleep, wake in the middle of the night for a couple of hours, to stoke the fire, say prayers or talk quietly, and then return to a second sleep. The idea of a single 8-hour sleep wasn't common. That's modern. And rare. You pass what must be a blacksmith's forge. Soot-blackened walls, the smell of iron and sweat. A stable. A cookshop. Selling yesterday's bread and something bubbling in a pot that smells like onions and despair. No one greets you, that's good. But they will ask eventually, who are you? In the Middle Ages, everyone belonged to someone. To a household, a guild, a parish, a trade. There's no such thing as a just passing through traveller. If you don't belong to a network, you're not protected. And if you're not protected, you're vulnerable to crime, arrest, or simple suspicion. So you rehearse your answer. You're a pilgrim. That's the safest option. Pilgrims were common, and they could be from anywhere. A story about being on the road to Canterbury or Santiago de Compostela will satisfy most people. You invent a village 400 miles away, hoping no one here has relatives there. You bow politely when someone makes eye contact. Don't shake hands. That wasn't common yet. You speak as little as possible. Your accent is strange. Your grammar worse. You mumble. You smile faintly. And then someone offers you bread. It's dry, dense, mostly rye, probably bulked with barley and bean flour. But it's warm. You chew it slowly, nodding thanks, hoping the act of eating makes you look less like someone who fell from the sky last night. And just like that, you've survived your first hour. But the day hasn't even begun. You've been awake for less than an hour, and already you're someone else. That's how things work here. No passports, no IDs, no background checks, just stories. And in medieval England, your story is your protection. You need one fast. You choose the safest lie you can think of. You're a pilgrim. You tell your first version of it to a stable boy. He asks where you're headed. You pause. Canterbury, you say, not because you're religious, but because it's the only medieval pilgrimage destination you can name under pressure. It works. He nods solemnly and goes back to mucking out straw. That's your new truth now. You're a pilgrim on your way to visit the shrine of St. Thomas Becket, the Archbishop famously murdered in Canterbury Cathedral in 1170. His martyrdom turned the city into one of Europe's most visited holy sites. Pilgrims came from all over, rich and poor, sick and healthy, devout and desperate, hoping for miracles, forgiveness, or just a few days of rest under God's gaze. It's a good cover. Pilgrims were everywhere in the Middle Ages, moving between towns, staying at inns and monasteries, travelling in groups when they could, alone when they had to. Some wore the scallop shell of Santiago. Others carried wooden staffs or painted tokens from previous shrines. Most were poor. Many were ill. A few were fugitives. All were tired. And now you are one of them. The lie isn't just for strangers, it's for yourself too. You repeat it internally, smoothing the edges. You come from a distant village. You're travelling alone because your cousin fell ill. You're visiting Canterbury because your brother had a dream. You're doing penance for a sin you won't name. You've practiced just enough church Latin to make your mumbled prayers sound authentic. Your story buys you shelter. A grey-robed monk at a small priory hears your tale and waves you inside. He doesn't ask many questions. He doesn't seem surprised by your strange accent or your patchy knowledge of scripture. Pilgrims were expected to be odd. You say you've been walking for weeks. He believes you. Everyone looks weathered here. He shows you to a room. Not really a room. More like a corner of a draughty hall with 3 other pilgrims sleeping side by side. One of them snores like an injured bear. Another mutters in his sleep. You pull your borrowed wool cloak tighter around your shoulders and try not to think about the bedbugs. Hospices and monasteries were some of the few places in medieval Europe where travellers could sleep without paying coin. The church was legally and spiritually obligated to provide charity to pilgrims. That obligation was sometimes ignored, of course, especially if the monk in question was having a bad day or the priories were stretched thin. But most would still offer at least some stale bread, a spoonful of pottage, and a patch of floor near a fire. You eat what you're given, barley pottage, boiled grey and salted with tears. You chew slowly, trying not to think of seasoning. Spices exist in this time, but not for you. A pinch of pepper costs more than your borrowed cloak. Your spoon is shared, wiped on cloth that has seen better centuries. Your bowl is wood, splintered, and probably older than the Magna Carta. Around you, the other pilgrims talk. One limps from a foot wound. Another coughs so violently you're surprised he's still upright. They tell their stories. A woman hoping for her son's healing. A man seeking redemption for adultery. A third who just wanted to see the world while his debts cooled down back home. None of them ask why you're here. They understand. In the Middle Ages, pilgrimage was part religion, part social mobility, and part escape. It was a way to disappear without actually vanishing. You try to sleep, but your thoughts churn. In your world, identity is static. Name, photo ID, biometrics. Here it's malleable. You could be anyone, so long as you can walk in a straight line and keep your story straight. No one here has heard of Google. No one's going to fact-check your claim that your uncle once met a monk in Mont Saint-Michel. They'll just nod. People believe strangers because they have to. The entire medieval world runs on trust and fear. The next morning you rise early, not by choice. There's no privacy, no doors, and the bell tolls for matins well before dawn. The monastery is cold, your breath fogs in the dark. You don't know the prayers, but you stand with the others, murmuring nonsense syllables under your breath. No one notices. Half of them are doing the same. Afterward, you're handed a heel of bread and told to move along. Pilgrims don't linger. Outside, the town is stirring. Vendors are rolling open stalls, mostly selling vegetables, old tools, or grey-looking meat. You walk past a butcher's stall and try not to stare too long at the headless pig carcass hanging from an iron hook. Flies already dance around it. Meat went bad quickly here. Salt was expensive. Freshness was a fantasy. You remember something from a history video. Most medieval towns had a market day, usually once a week. That's when rural folk from nearby villages brought their goods in to sell. Eggs, cheese, root vegetables. You'd have to barter or haggle. There's no such thing as fixed prices. Everything is a negotiation, and if you don't know the local currency, silver pennies, half pennies, farthings, you'll get fleeced. You want to buy something, but realise you have nothing to trade. Not even a coin. You still have your wristwatch tucked into a wool sleeve. You glance at it, but it means nothing here. No one cares what time it is. People in this world measure time by bells, prayers, and the position of the sun. If it's light out, you work. If it's dark, you pray, hide, or sleep. You decide to ask for help instead. You spot a woman selling oatcakes and approach slowly, trying to look humble but not pitiful. You speak softly, explaining you're on the road, low on supplies, and blessed to meet such a generous face. It's not Shakespeare, but she gives you one cake anyway. Maybe she believes you. Maybe she just likes feeding people. Maybe she wants your blessing. Pilgrims were holy, or at least adjacent to holiness. Many townsfolk believed that aiding a pilgrim earned favour with God. You say a quick Deus te benedicat in your best fake Latin accent. It means, God bless you. She nods, pleased. You chew slowly as you wander the streets. The oatcake is dense, unsweetened, and laced with something bitter. Wormwood, maybe, or just bad grain. Still, it's food. You count your blessings. 1 oatcake, 2 working legs, no fever. Yet. You pass a group of children playing in the dirt. One of them is holding a carved wooden hoop, rolling it along the ground with a stick. Another clutches a crude doll made of rags. They stop and stare at you. Not in fear, just curiosity. One points to your wrist. You cover it instinctively. That's when it hits you. You're not out of the woods. You've got your story, your cloak, your pilgrim status. But you don't have years of dirt under your fingernails. You don't carry yourself like someone who's been beaten down by a lifetime of scarcity. You walk too straight. You flinch at smells. You make eye contact too much. It's subtle, but it's there. To them, you still don't quite belong. So you drop your gaze. You shuffle a little more. You mimic the limp of the man you saw last night. You avoid direct questions. You learn to listen before you speak. This world doesn't care how smart you are. It cares whether you follow the rhythm, blend in or vanish. That night, you find another place to sleep, a barn offered by a generous farmer in exchange for chopping wood. You say yes before he finishes the sentence. Your hands blister after 5 minutes. He doesn't notice, or doesn't care. Labour is labour. Pain is normal. As you lie in the hay, curled into a ball against the cold, you rehearse your story again. You're a pilgrim, from the north, on the road to Canterbury, travelling for penance, alone, always alone. And as the stars turn overhead, bright and indifferent, you realise this truth. Lying is easy in the Middle Ages. Living is not. You wake to bird song and a stiff neck. The straw you slept on has shifted in the night, and now a twig has embedded itself somewhere beneath your shoulder blade. You roll over slowly, swatting at gnats, and blink your eyes open to a patch of grey sky and the low, heavy branches of oak. There's no roof here, just tree limbs and fog. This is your camp now. No walls, no hearth. Just a hollow in the earth, behind a mossy boulder, hidden off the forest path. The best place for someone like you to disappear for a while. You are lucky to be offered work. Not everyone is. The farmer's sister, or perhaps his wife, you couldn't tell, told you there was a need for extra hands gathering firewood and herbs from the forest. You agreed before asking what it entailed. You needed the food. You still do. So now, for today, you are a forager. And like everything else in the Middle Ages, this job comes with rules. First rule: the forest does not belong to you. That might be hard to accept, especially if you come from a world where trees are public, land is protected, and anyone with a pair of hiking boots can wander freely. But here, in the 1300s, the forest is not wilderness, it is property. Every stretch of woodland in England is either held by a noble, claimed by the crown, or attached to an estate. You do not own the acorns. You do not own the rabbits. You do not own the fallen twigs. Collecting firewood might seem harmless, but if you're caught with the wrong bundle of sticks in the wrong part of the woods, you could be beaten, fined, or even branded. This is the age of the forest laws. Introduced after the Norman conquest and expanded under monarchs like Henry II, these laws protected hunting grounds for the elite. Royal forests were especially off limits, even to peasants who lived nearby. You could be hanged for killing a deer, mutilated for setting traps, or flogged for chopping down trees. So, second rule: don't get caught. You keep to the edges, avoiding cleared paths. You carry a dull knife and a sack that once held barley. You pick up only what's already fallen: twigs, small branches, dry bramble. No cutting, no chopping, just gathering. The forest is quiet in the early hours, save for the rustle of squirrels and the distant call of a wood pigeon. You see no other humans. Good. That's what you want. The best foragers are the ones no one notices. But silence doesn't mean safety. The forest is still dangerous. Wolves are gone, mostly, hunted out of southern England by this century. Bears have been extinct here for hundreds of years. But there are still dangers. Wild boars, hornets, and most of all men. You hear a crunch behind you? You freeze. Just a deer. Probably. Still your heart hammers. Bandits are real here. The woods are a natural hideout for the desperate. Escaped serfs, outlaws, deserters from local militias. They live rough, ambush travellers, and disappear into the trees. The king's law doesn't stretch far into these parts. If someone robs you out here, you won't get justice. You won't get anything. So you keep your head down and work faster. You don't just gather firewood. You're also collecting wild herbs. The farmer's sister, no, his wife, you've decided, gave you a list scrawled with marks you can't read. But she named them aloud: yarrow, mugwort, chickweed, comfrey, plantain. You recognise some. You pretend to recognise the rest. These plants are not just for flavouring food, though food could certainly use the help. They're medicine, insect repellent, even magic in the eyes of some. You pick them carefully and place them in separate cloth pouches. You whisper their names under your breath, part prayer, part memory. A patch of nettles stings your hands. You wince, but say nothing. No gloves. You'll just deal with it. You take a break at midday, crouched near a tree stump. Your lunch is a crust of rye bread, hard as stone, and a pinch of salt from the bottom of your pocket. You eat it slowly like it matters. There's water nearby, a stream, shallow and slick with green algae. You scoop some into your hands and drink. The taste is earthy. You'll probably regret this tomorrow. Maybe tonight. But the beer you were given is long gone, and you need something to wash down the bread. You spot a small bundle of mushrooms under an elm. White caps, fragile stems. You pause. Mushrooms are dangerous here. One wrong guess and you'll die vomiting in a ditch, your skin grey and your mouth foaming. Medieval people knew this. Folk wisdom passed from mothers to daughters warned of the poisonous kinds. Death caps, destroying angels, fools' mushrooms. But they also prized the safe ones. Puffballs, morels, field mushrooms. You decide not to risk it. You leave them. You spend the afternoon weaving through thickets, your legs scraped and your knees soaked with bog water. A bramble tears your sleeve. You make a note to mend it later, if you can find a needle. Your cloak is already threadbare, and your tunic smells like every bad thing you've touched in the last 24 hours. As you walk, your mind drifts. You think about what it would be like to live this way every day. Some people do, the poorest villagers, widows, orphans, landless peasants, often supplement their diets by foraging. Some even make it their primary trade, gathering herbs and firewood to sell at the market. These forest workers are not respected. They're seen as borderline vagrants, useful when someone needs birch bark or sage, ignored otherwise. But their knowledge is immense. They know which tree bleeds the cleanest sap, which root breaks fevers, which patch of moss makes the best poultice. Their wisdom is passed quietly, never written down. You wonder how many secrets have already been lost. By late afternoon, your sack is full. Your shoulders ache. Your fingers are bleeding from thorns. You begin the walk back, retracing your steps to avoid any unfamiliar paths. Getting lost in a medieval forest is not poetic. It's deadly. No GPS, no signage. If the sun sets before you find the road, you may not make it out. You emerge from the woods just as the sky begins to dim. The farmer is waiting near the fields. He eyes your haul and grunts approval. His wife takes the herbs without a word and drops a turnip into your palm. That's your pay. You want to complain. You want to say you worked all day for a root vegetable, but you don't. Because in this world, complaining is dangerous. Gratitude is safer. You nod and say thank you. She doesn't smile, but she doesn't hit you either. You eat the turnip raw, sitting by the dying embers of the farm's cook fire. It's bitter, but it fills the space in your stomach. Just barely. That night, you sleep in the barn again. The cows are snoring. A chicken perches dangerously close to your head. You lie on a pile of old straw and stare at the rafters. You think about the forest, its silence, its rules, its quiet judgment. You were only there for a day. Some people never leave. You really thought you were ready. You'd downloaded PDFs, watched hour-long YouTube linguistics breakdowns, even practiced aloud in your car like a lunatic. Godna deg, you had muttered proudly to yourself in the mirror. Ik eom kumen from Feoran. You had this. You were going to blend in with the locals. Fool them all. But now that you're here, really here, standing in the cobbled market square of a medieval English town, surrounded by smells you can't describe, and people who all seem to be speaking while chewing gravel, you realise you have absolutely no idea what anyone is saying. It's not just the accent. It's not just the slang. It's that they're not even speaking the language you studied. You'd chosen Old English. Figured it was the safe bet. Anglo-Saxon roots. You remembered Beowulf. But Beowulf was written 400 years ago from where you're standing. The people here are speaking a form of Middle English, but not the kind Chaucer wrote down. This is something else. Something brutal. Something nasal and fast, splattered with French loanwords and riddled with regional weirdness. You try to follow a conversation between two traders and can't tell if they're haggling over fish or accusing each other of witchcraft. One man shouts across the square, "Hoy, that be yon reeve. What's told me off yon soak? In it he." You blink. "Sorry." He squints. "Be thee daft or Flemish?" You mumble something about having a sore throat and shuffle away. You make a mental note. Don't talk unless absolutely necessary. Back home, you thought language would be the least of your problems. You'd assumed disease, violence, or dysentery would kill you first. But now it's becoming clear. Your mouth is the real liability. The second you open it, you're a walking contradiction. Someone who looks like a local, maybe smells like one by now, but talks like they were raised by a committee of monks and time travellers. The word choices are wrong. The cadence is wrong. And God help you if someone tries to make a joke. You're learning that humour is terrifying when you don't understand the punchline. You laugh nervously when a baker says something to you about a hedge priest's sausage, and then realise from his expression that he wasn't joking. Or maybe he was. Or maybe it was an insult. You start miming more. A lot more. Hungry? Rub your belly? Tired? Point at the sun and yawn. Need directions? Just walk with purpose and hope someone follows you. This isn't communication, it's charades for survival. Later that day, in the shadow of the parish church, you overhear two children arguing over a sheep. The older one yells, "Nay, I fain saw it go by the breck." The smaller one jabs back, "Nay, 'twas thine eyes gone addle, fool." You could not feel more foreign if you tried. You start cataloguing phrases in your head, trying to reverse engineer meaning. Fain means glad or wanted. Breck must be some kind of hill or field. Maybe? You don't even know what century you're linguistically in anymore. Then there are the loanwords. After the Norman conquest, French bled into the English tongue, like wine into linen. Nobles speak in a clipped, smoother dialect, laced with Latin and French, while the peasants bark with thick consonants and nasal vowels. You start to realise that class is audible here. You can hear who owns land and who sleeps in a ditch, just from how they pronounce the word bread. You try saying pardon to a noble, and he nods. You try the same word to a stable hand, and he spits. At one point, desperate to communicate, you try to recall some Latin. Big mistake. A friar overhears you reciting an old phrase from a textbook and asks where you trained. You panic and say, Rome. He frowns and starts asking questions about church councils you've never heard of. You fake a cough and limp away. You now have a new rule. No Latin unless it's in a prayer, and you're not the first to say it. Later, you find yourself in a cookshop, trying to purchase what you think is a pasty. You point. The cook stares at you. 2 farthings, she says. You hold out a handful of pennies. She picks out 4 of them, then slaps your wrist and takes a 5th. You blink. No more in yestermorn's bread for ye, she mutters, handing you something that smells like a barn floor. You nod. Cheers, you say instinctively. Everyone in the room freezes. You realise, too late, that cheers is not a medieval word. Not like that. They stare at you like you just said something obscene. One man chuckles. Another narrows his eyes. You mutter, God give ye good morrow, and bolt out the door. There's another surprise. Reading doesn't help. You had assumed signs would be easier, but almost nothing is written, and when it is, it's inconsistent, phonetic, and barely legible. There's no standard spelling. Alehouse might be spelled Alehus one day and Alufs the next. The only people who can write well are clerics, and they write in Latin anyway. Even street names, when posted, are sometimes just pictures. One tanner has a crude painting of a cow and a knife above his stall. Another stall, no joke, just has a turnip nailed to a board. You feel like you're illiterate, which, to be fair, would make you just like most people here. The worst part isn't the confusion. It's the danger of miscommunication. Say the wrong thing, and people assume you're mad, or foreign, or cursed. One evening a drunk stumbles into you. You instinctively say, sorry, my fault. He squints. My fault? What, you confess into witchery, are you? You quickly change it to, forgive me. I was clumsy. That seems to work. Barely. You realise, in this world, words can get you hurt. There's no Yelp, no customer service, no ironic oops to shrug off a mistake. The people here live close to violence, suspicion, and insult. And you are always one bad sentence away from being called a heretic, a spy, or just not right in the head. Over time, you adapt. You learn to use simple, short phrases. You copy what others say, even if you don't fully understand. You start saying I instead of yes, nay instead of no. You use gestures whenever possible. You never ask questions unless someone else asks one first. You listen more than you speak. And it helps, a little. By the end of your 4th day, you can order food without being scammed. You know how to respond to greetings. You've even made a boy laugh by using the word arse at the right time. You're still a foreigner, but maybe a harmless one. You lie in the monastery loft that night, staring at the rafters, the straw mattress prickling your back, and realise you've survived not because of knowledge, but because of mimicry. Because you learned to copy faster than you could explain. The truth is, language here isn't a tool. It's a test. And every conversation is a pop quiz in a dialect you don't speak, with a punishment for failure. You think of your phone, the Translate app, the internet. You think of how many times you've Googled a word, a phrase, an idiom. That luxury is gone. All you have now is your ears and your memory. And if you say the wrong thing tomorrow, the truly wrong thing, you might not get to say anything ever again. It starts with a cramp, not a dramatic one. Just a small, nagging pinch in your gut, like you skipped lunch or ate something that didn't sit right. You think nothing of it. You've had worse after airport sushi. But within the hour, you're curled up behind a pigsty, clutching your stomach and praying to a god whose prayers apparently smell like manure. This is not a metaphorical bad day. This is medieval gastrointestinal reality kicking in. You tried to be careful. You really did. You boiled the water. You stuck to what looked like bread. You avoided anything with colour. But the problem isn't the food. It's everything. Your body, raised on pasteurised milk, municipal tap water, and sterile grocery aisles, has no idea how to cope with medieval Europe's microbial jungle. You are, as they would say, soft. Your first suspect is the pottage. Pottage is what they serve when they don't want to serve food. It's a murky oatmeal-like sludge of grains and whatever else didn't rot in the last few days. Cabbage, maybe a turnip, possibly a frog, depending on the cook's attitude toward protein and plausibility. The same pot is used day after day, refilled endlessly with more of the same. A medieval version of a never-ending stew, flavoured with time, despair, and whatever fell in when no one was looking. You knew all that. You ate it anyway. And now your stomach feels like it's hosting a reenactment of the Norman invasion. By the time the sun sets, you're alternating between cold sweat and chills, wrapped in your itchy wool cloak like a sad medieval burrito. Your face is pale. Your lips are dry. You try to sip beer. Weak, watery ale, the safest thing to drink here. But even that turns against you. This isn't just food poisoning. This is your immune system panicking like a chihuahua in a thunderstorm. Now some background. Germ theory does not exist yet. No one knows what bacteria are. They don't even know what causes disease. Not really. Illness is believed to come from bad air, miasma, or imbalances in your humours. Blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Depending on which one's out of whack, your treatment might be leeches, vomiting, purging, or prayer. Most people never learn what made them sick. They just get sick. And either they recover, or they disappear. So when you wake up the next morning still alive, groggy but breathing, you've already done better than a decent percentage of your contemporaries. A nun finds you that morning, collapsed near the back wall of a Dominican friary, looking like a broken scarecrow. You try to stand, but the world tilts sideways and your legs fold like bread dough. She doesn't flinch, just lifts your chin, squints at your eyes and tucks something bitter and leathery into your mouth. It's disgusting, like someone soaked tree bark in vinegar and sadness. You try to spit it out, but she shushes you with the force of someone who has done this 1,000 times. You chew, you swallow, you don't vomit. A victory. She doesn't ask who you are. She doesn't report you. She just presses a coarse cloth to your forehead and mutters a prayer you can barely follow. It's Latin, and you catch only a few familiar phrases. Something about mercy, something about healing, something about how humans are like dust. You nod weakly. That last part sounds about right. This, you'll learn, is one of the rare benefits of the medieval world. While medicine is horrific, charity is baked into the culture, especially through the church. Religious orders run rudimentary infirmaries. Monasteries often have a hospitaller, a monk or nun responsible for tending the sick, even outsiders. Hospitality is sacred. If you're lucky, and you were, they will treat you even if you can't pay. And here's another historical wrinkle. You're not alone. Half the town is sick with something. Coughs, skin infections, fevers. It's a walking petri dish. Sanitation is theoretical. Hygiene is seasonal. Medicine is improvised. And yet, somehow, people survive. Over the next 2 days, you barely move. The friary lets you lie on a straw mat near the wall, not quite in the infirmary, but close enough to be monitored. A girl brings you thin broth in a chipped wooden bowl. You manage a few sips. You are so exhausted it feels structural. Like even your bones are tired. Every joint aches. Your spine feels like it's been rolled down a hill. Your breath smells like you've been chewing onions in a tomb, and you're pretty sure that none changed your shirt while you were unconscious. You'll thank her later. When you finally manage to sit upright without tipping over, you hear it, the bell tower striking sext, noon. Time is marked here not by watches or apps, but by bells, 7 canonical hours, each a holy checkpoint. You learn them by accident. You become a creature of bells, of hunger, of gut sounds, and the occasional vision of St. Peter riding a flaming goat. Okay, that part might have been the fever. By the 3rd day, you've graduated to walking. Slowly. You help sweep the courtyard to show your gratitude. Your legs wobble like they've forgotten what being vertical means, but you don't collapse. The friar overseeing you nods in approval. He offers you another lump of that foul root stuff. Maybe horehound, maybe licorice, maybe just dirt, and you chew it dutifully. He claps you on the shoulder. You take it as a blessing, or a warning. You've been sick, really sick, but you didn't die, and that makes you a statistical outlier. Historically speaking, many people didn't get better. Illness in the Middle Ages could mean anything from a passing bug to your last few days on Earth. Infant mortality rates were horrific. The average life expectancy hovered around 35, but that's skewed heavily by child deaths. If you made it past 10, you had a decent shot at surviving to 50. But illness was never a surprise. It was a companion, part of life. You expected it, endured it, and when it came for your neighbour or your child or your spouse, you grieved, briefly, and carried on, because there was always more to do, always another fire to stoke, another field to plough, another mouth to feed. You learned something else in your recovery. People don't talk about sickness the way you're used to. No long venting sessions. No long-winded symptom breakdowns. No, how are you holding up texts, they shrug. It's the season, they say. Or it's God's will. Or just it happens. And in a way, it makes sense. When illness is everywhere, and medicine barely functions, talking about it doesn't help. So they don't. It's humbling. And a little terrifying. Because if you fall sick again, and you probably will, you might not be lucky next time. You might not find the nun. You might not be near a friary. You might just collapse in a gutter and not wake up. The next day you feel strong enough to leave. The friar gives you a pat on the back. The girl with the broth smiles shyly. You try to say thank you in the local dialect, but it probably comes out closer to, I kneel in the direction of your turnip. They don't correct you. You walk out of the friary and into the morning light, a little bent, a lot grateful, and 7 pounds lighter. Everything smells stronger. bread, smoke, dung, sweat. The world feels sharp, real, present. You survived. And in the Middle Ages, that's enough to count as a good day. You wake up with a new appreciation for life, also with no bag. It takes you a few seconds to register what's missing. You pat the ground around you, check under your straw mat, then under the mat of the man beside you, who is snoring with the delicate subtlety of a charging ox. Your satchel, the one that held your last pair of socks, 2 small coins, a now precious bar of emergency chocolate, and your hidden compass is gone, vanished, along with any lingering belief that you are beginning to blend in. You sit up and look around. It's morning in the back alley of a town that doesn't know your name and wouldn't care if you dropped dead in it. Somewhere, a bell tolls the hour. Nearby, a vendor shouts about cabbage in a voice that could tenderize meat. Life goes on. Just not your life, not as planned. Let's be clear. You've just been robbed and nobody cares. There's no police station, no mounted guards patrolling with notepads and radios, no 911 dispatcher asking, "What's your emergency?" The only law enforcement around is the bailiff, and his main job is making sure your taxes get paid, not returning your missing socks. You try mentioning your loss to a woman sweeping her doorstep. She glances up, shrugs, and mutters something that roughly translates to, "Welcome to town." You tell a local friar. He frowns sympathetically, says a prayer for your misplaced satchel, and suggests perhaps it was God's will. You mention the word stolen to a baker. He laughs so hard he nearly drops a tray of rye bricks. Not because he thinks you're lying, because of course it was stolen. What else did you think would happen? In medieval towns, theft is not an outlier. It's part of the natural order, right up there with mud, poor dental hygiene, and sudden outbreaks of fire. Everyone is poor. Everyone is desperate. And anything you leave unattended is considered up for grabs. That's why locals carry their valuables tied to their belts, tucked in hidden pouches, or quite literally sewn into their clothes. Wealthy merchants often hired boys to shadow them, not as apprentices, but as moving alarms. Even nuns kept a wary eye on their coin purses. Sanctity is no match for scarcity. And knives? Those aren't accessories, they're necessities. Every peasant has one. Every merchant carries one. Even small children sometimes carry small blades, not for fighting, but for cutting bread, slicing apples, and, if absolutely necessary, making sure someone doesn't take the bread or the apple. Theft wasn't just tolerated. In many cases, it was expected. Eventually, you return to the friary where you've been staying, where you recently recovered from your first medieval stomach catastrophe. You recount the theft again, with a bit more drama this time. You add sorrow. You lean into the tragic tone. Brother Thomas, or maybe it's Brother Matthew, all the monks blur together, listens with polite gravity. He disappears into a side room and returns a few minutes later, placing something into your palm. A knife. It's small, rusted. The blade is dull and the handle is cracked, but it fits in your hand. You try to hand it back. He doesn't let go, he makes a gesture. Palm flat, knife up, and walks away. You don't need a full understanding of the local dialect to get the message. Keep it with you. Always. Historically speaking, this is not unusual. In fact, for someone in your position, alone, unfamiliar, and extremely muggable, this is practically a rite of passage. In medieval England, justice didn't work the way modern visitors might hope. While there were courts and laws, actual enforcement was rare and wildly inconsistent. A constable might exist in theory, but his authority was local, his power limited, and his priorities skewed heavily toward protecting landowners, collecting fines, and making sure the tavern didn't turn into a murder pit every Saturday night. You, an unknown foreigner with no local kin or guild membership, are not the kind of person anyone is going to stick their neck out for. Guilds, powerful associations of craftsmen and merchants, protected their own. But outsiders, those not under guild protection or tied into a household, were fair game. And you're not in a guild. You're not from a household. You are a walking opportunity. Markets are the worst. They're crowded, loud, and full of opportunities to get relieved of your belongings. Street performers attract gawkers. Gawkers create crowds. Crowds create cover. And somewhere in that chaos, a cutpurse practices his art. Theft is so common that it's priced into everything. The merchant selling you a dusty apple has already accepted that 3 more will go missing before noon. The baker keeps his coin jar buried in flour. The butcher keeps his cleaver sharp and visible. And when thieves do get caught, well, that depends on who they stole from. Punishments are theatrical, often gruesome, and wildly inconsistent. For minor thefts, public humiliation is common. A thief might be tied to the pillory and pelted with rotten turnips, or forced to wear a wooden plaque proclaiming "I stole a chicken" while being paraded through the streets. Repeat offenders, or those unlucky enough to steal from the wrong person, might lose a hand, an ear, or both. In some places, thieves are branded with hot irons to mark them for life. In others, they're hanged. No trial, no appeal, just a rope and an audience. You quickly realise that while the law is slow to act, it's spectacularly vicious when it does. But here's the important part. Most thieves are never caught, because no one is watching, and no one really wants to. Your instincts sharpen. You start tying your coin pouch inside your tunic. You walk with your hand over it in crowds. You sleep with it tucked under your ribs. You learn to recognise the signs. Someone following too closely. Hands hidden under a cloak. Questions asked too casually. You also learn the art of preemptive destitution, walking like you have nothing, dressing even shabbier than you are, pretending to limp, so thieves assume you're not worth the effort. Your new life strategy? Be uninteresting. You meet a man near the baker's stall. He's missing 3 teeth and has a knife scar that runs from jaw to collarbone. He offers you half a cabbage and a story. In exchange, he asks for nothing. You eat the cabbage, you hear the story, you leave with all your belongings, progress. Not all theft is for survival. Sometimes it's professional. Medieval cities had entire underground economies, gangs of cutpurses, highwaymen working just outside town, fences operating under the guise of scrap traders. Even churchyards weren't sacred. Pickpockets operated during services because they knew half the congregation was too deep in prayer to notice their purse vanishing. Taverns were prime hunting grounds. Travellers drank more, talked louder, and kept looser hands on their goods. Some innkeepers even encouraged the practice, skimming the unlucky and taking a cut from the thieves in return. You've met at least 3 pickpockets. 2 robbed you. 1 taught you how to walk like someone not worth robbing. That one you almost trust? Almost. By week's end, you've hardened. You don't speak unless you must. You carry your knife, dull though it is, like it matters. You nod instead of smile. You walk wide around beggars wearing boots nicer than yours. A local calls you wise. You take it as a compliment. You trade a half onion for a crust of bread and what might be sausage. You eat it anyway. And that night, curled behind the friary wall, you sleep with one hand on your pouch and the other on your blade. For the first time since you arrived in this unpredictable, mud-soaked century, you wake up with all your things. You learn your next lesson before you've even finished your breakfast. It happens in a tavern, or what passes for one. The food is warm, the bread nearly fresh, and the stew only mildly offensive. You've started to feel something like confidence. A local woman even smiled at you as she refilled your bowl. For a second, it feels like maybe you're getting the hang of this century. Then you make the mistake of sitting at the wrong table. You pick it because it's near the fire. Your feet are numb and your clothes still smell like last night's rain. There are 3 other men at the table, all eating, none talking. You assume, in your modern way, that a table is just a table. It is not. The one closest to you stops chewing. The man across from him slowly lowers his spoon. The third, older and broad-shouldered with hands like tree roots, simply stares. He doesn't yell. He just stares. You feel it like heat. Or frost. You stand up. Nobody tells you why you can't sit there. Nobody needs to. You already know. You are not the same. Not in dress. Not in posture. Not in class. In medieval England, social hierarchy isn't just about power. It's about place. And you're out of yours. You take your stew to a bench by the door. It's colder, but safer. You begin to notice it everywhere. The way some people don't step aside when you pass. The way others bow, but only slightly. The tilt of a head, the cut of a tunic, the colour of a belt. These aren't fashion choices. They're signals. Class isn't a guess here. It's a script. Everyone plays their part. Lords command. Knights strut. Guildsmen puff their chests. Peasants look down. Servants vanish into the background. Even children know who they're supposed to bow to. It's instinct. Cultural muscle memory. And you? You're a blank page, which is dangerous. You bow too deeply to a merchant's wife. She laughs. Her guards don't. You raise your voice at a servant who shorted you on bread. He spits in your stew, and no one does a thing. You try to explain yourself once, out loud, to a baker. I didn't know. He looks at you like you're an idiot. Then you shouldn't be here. Fair. Historically speaking, this wasn't rudeness. It was survival. Medieval society was rigid by necessity. There were no resumes, no ID cards, no LinkedIn pages. Your clothes, your speech, your posture, that was your identity. Those were the clues that told others how to treat you. And if you didn't follow the rules, the whole system frayed. Most people were born into their station and died in it. If you were a villain, a kind of unfree peasant, you couldn't just become a merchant. If you were a tanner, you were expected to stay a tanner. The few who climbed ranks usually did so through the church or by military service. And even then, it took a generation or two. Everyone else stayed firmly in their lane. You meet a man named Will near the blacksmith's stall. He looks at you with a kind of exhausted pity and tells you the rules. Not all of them. That would take weeks. But enough to keep you from offending the next person you speak to. You don't touch anyone wearing silk, he says. Not even if they're choking. You blink. What if they need help? Then pray for them, he says, from a respectful distance. He explains that colours are codes. Fur-lined cloaks are power. Blue and purple are reserved for nobility. Green is fine, unless it's too fine. And linen? Only if it's been washed recently. Yours hasn't. He also tells you this. You've been walking wrong. Apparently, your gait is too loose, too confident. You don't step softly enough. Don't lower your head fast enough. Don't make space fast enough when a higher ranked person walks by. You move like someone who's never been hit for moving wrong, he says. They'll fix that. And they almost do. That afternoon, you try to get a better spot near the public well. The water's cleanish and the sun is warm. You step ahead of a girl carrying a heavy pail. She looks about 13, face sunburned, hands raw. An older woman behind her shouts. You don't catch the words, but you get the tone. Everyone looks. You freeze. The girl glares at you with a kind of weary fury and says, "Where's your badge?" You don't have one. Apprentices in town wear pins or stitch symbols. They show you belong to someone. If you don't, you're a stranger. And strangers are beneath everyone. You step back. She doesn't thank you. She shouldn't have to. You start paying attention. You notice that even eye contact is stratified. A noble doesn't look at a merchant. A merchant doesn't look at a peasant. A peasant doesn't look at anyone unless spoken to. And you? You look at everyone like you're trying to read subtitles. You learn to lower your gaze, to speak less, to speak softer, to say "my lord" even when it sticks in your throat. Eventually, people stop looking at you with suspicion. Now they look through you. Like a servant. Like you belong. Progress. There are benefits, strange as it sounds. Being invisible means you overhear things. Plans, rumours, prices, secrets. You start to understand the town not just by its layout, but by its tensions. Who's sleeping with whom? Who's stealing flour? Who's plotting to skip tithes? You become a shadow with ears. You also become tired. It is exhausting to carry the weight of invisibility. You begin to dream of modern things not for comfort, but for clarity. A line, a menu, a name tag, something to tell you where you stand. Because here, you never quite know. You're not noble, you're not guild, you're not clergy, you're not a peasant, you're not a pilgrim, at least not a convincing one. You're a gap in the system, tolerated but not trusted, a body in borrowed clothing. One night, a boy bumps into you in the dark and mutters, "Watch it, lowborn." You should be angry, you should be indignant, but all you feel is relief. He thinks he knows what you are. That's the closest you've come to belonging. You're sitting on a low stone wall, chewing something that was allegedly bread when you make the mistake. You're trying to find north. You don't mean to show off. You just want to know where you buried your emergency items 2 days ago in the woods. You dig into the pouch you've sewn into your tunic lining and palm the compass. Just a glance. A peek. It's small, discreet, and blessedly accurate. Unlike medieval directions, which seem to be based entirely on how loudly someone can point. Unfortunately, you're not as discreet as you think. A boy passing by stops, eyes wide. "Is that a jewel?" he asks in something halfway between French and curiosity. You snap the compass shut and shove it back into your tunic, but it's too late. He's already shouting for someone. His uncle, maybe. or a local gossip merchant. Within minutes, you've got a small crowd staring at you like you've grown a second head, and it's singing in Latin. A woman crosses herself. A man mutters about Eastern sorcery. A priest, somewhere nearby, starts walking your way. You walk away, casually, calmly, absolutely not at a pace that would be considered fleeing. Just brisk. This is your warning. Nothing screams, "Not from here," like pulling out an item no one can name. Even the simplest modern object, a pen light, a zipper, a plastic button, can trigger suspicion. Not always because it's terrifying. Sometimes it's just unfamiliar enough to be interesting. And in a town where interesting is one step away from dangerous, that's not a compliment. Remember, the medieval worldview doesn't make space for weird but harmless. Things are either part of the natural order or they're not. And if they're not, they probably came from the devil, or the East, or both. Later that afternoon, as you lean against the friary wall pretending to read a religious carving, the local priest finds you. He's not hostile, just curious. Too curious. He asks where you're from. You say far away. He asks what you do. You say pilgrim. He asks if pilgrims commonly carry compasses that glow slightly in the sun and spin like enchanted beetles. You change the subject. He doesn't. Historically, priests were often the most educated people in town. They could read. They had access to old texts. And worst of all, they had time. They were also charged with maintaining moral and spiritual order, which in practice meant deciding who was a threat. And while witch trials weren't yet in full swing in the 1300s, heretics, sorcerers, and suspicious foreigners were definitely on the radar. The church didn't need proof, just a sense of unease, a few whispers, a failure to attend mass regularly, or a compass you couldn't explain. That night, you make your way back to the forest. Not the edge like before, deep, past the berry bushes and the stinging nettles, past the tree where you tripped last week and cursed so loudly the squirrels haven't returned. You find the spot. You dig with a flat stone. Your hands are freezing. Eventually, you uncover your stash. A small tin of waterproof matches, your backup compass, a protein bar, and a laminated card that reads "Emergency Contact." You stare at it. There is no emergency contact here, just you. You bury the compass again, deeper this time. Wrap it in linen. You hesitate, then bury the protein bar too. You don't need it drawing attention. You keep the matches. If someone asks, you'll say the friar taught you flint tricks. You lie well now. In medieval towns, being from somewhere else buys you about 10 minutes of grace. After that, people want details, names, maps, saints. You can't just say, "I'm from a distant land," and expect a polite nod. Everyone in medieval Europe is from somewhere, and everyone knows someone who's been there. Slip up once and people assume you're lying. Slip up twice and they assume you're dangerous. You've slipped up twice this week alone. So you change tactics. You get quieter. You speak less. You start bowing more. You mutter a lot. If someone asks a question you don't know how to answer, you look pained and say it's a matter of penance. People nod solemnly. Mystery is safer than mistakes. Let's be clear about something. Medieval people are not stupid. They know their world. They know how knives should look, how fabric should stretch, how thread should unravel. They've never seen a seam like the one on your undershirt. You tell them it's a monk's design. They narrow their eyes. Monks don't sew like that. A baker eyes the smooth finish of your boots, modern leather soles, dyed to look crude. Strange tanning, he says. You mumble something about foreign oxen. A merchant fingers the synthetic cord tied around your belt. He tests its strength. What plant makes this? You say it's a rare northern weed. His eyebrows rise. You're running out of lies. Eventually, someone calls you a mystic. Not in a complimentary way. It happens after you help a child who scraped his knee. You cleaned it with wine, wrapped it with clean cloth, said nothing magical, but the child got better quickly. Too quickly. A neighbour saw. A neighbour told. Now people think you know things. It's not always dangerous to be called a mystic. Some mystics are tolerated, especially if they're old, quiet, and very religious. But you're none of those things. You're young. You're foreign. And you don't always know which saint to mention when someone sneezes. Here's the real risk. You're interesting. In medieval life, that's rarely good. Interesting people get noticed. Noticed people get questioned. Questioned people get tested. And you don't want to be tested. You start burying more things. Not just your gear, but your personality. Your stories, your gestures. You practice local slang. You learn which saints are popular. You start dressing more plainly. You pick up a phrase. I go where the Lord leads. It's vague, devout, and confusing enough to stop most questions. You say it a lot. One day in the market, you spot someone else who doesn't belong. She's wearing sandals in winter. Her cloak is too new. She asks the price of a pie in perfect Latin, like a schoolbook come to life. The vendor squints. You step away. She'll learn. Or she won't. Either way, she's not your problem. By now your instinct is honed. If something looks shiny, you cover it. If someone stares too long, you walk away. If a priest smiles too warmly, you prepare an escape route. You know which alleys to duck into, which dogs to avoid, which bread stalls don't overcharge pilgrims who ask too many questions. You sleep with your knife. You pray like you mean it. You've told 5 different people you're heading to Santiago. You've never seen a map of Santiago, but you have the conviction of someone who knows not to lose face. And really, that's what survival is now. Not losing face, not looking like a magician, not sounding like a liar, not smelling like modern soap. By the end of the week, you've earned a reputation. Quiet. Odd. From the East, maybe. Touched by the saints or something else. But no one tries to burn you. No one drags you before the magistrate. No one digs up your stash. Not yet. And in the Middle Ages, not yet is a kind of victory. You're getting better at disappearing. Not literally, of course. You still walk through the muddy alleys like some underfed ghost in borrowed clothes. But now you've learned to shrink yourself, to round off your modern edges, to stop standing out. Your accent hasn't changed, but your confidence has. You don't speak unless spoken to. You keep your gestures small, your reactions delayed. You don't ask questions. You don't smile too widely. You try, with increasing skill, to become forgettable. And it's working. A merchant actually looked past you today. That, you realise, is a kind of medieval milestone. Let's be clear. Blending in doesn't mean you belong. It just means people stop looking too hard. And in the 14th century, invisibility is the only true safety a stranger can buy. It starts with your body. You've lost weight. Not that you were heavy to begin with, but now your ribs make cameo appearances. Your gait is slower. You've learned to walk in patterns, to move with the flow of traffic in the market, not against it. You mimic the posture of the tired, the half-bowed humility of someone born to be overlooked. Your clothing helps too. The tunic you traded for, a scratchy, mud-stained mess of coarse wool, is now faded enough to pass. In the patched cloak you wrapped around it no longer smells distinctly not from here, but instead just smells bad, like everyone else. You even dirtied your face on purpose this morning, just a little soot. It works better than a disguise. Clean faces are suspicious. You've learned to speak less and listen more. You understand the rhythm now. Not the words necessarily, but the tones, the pauses, the kinds of things people care about. Bread, rain, gossip, the baker's daughter, who disappeared for 2 days, the tanner's wife, who gave birth to twins, again. The rumour that the tax collector's mule was cursed by a beggar. You repeat some of these stories cautiously when the moment calls for it. You don't claim to know things, only that you heard them on the road. No one questions it. Everyone hears things on the road. You also know what not to say. You don't mention prices, measurements, or dates. You never use numbers you're unsure of. You don't say kilometre, or coffee, or Tuesday, unless someone else says it first. You've eliminated phrases like makes sense and no problem. You once said sure, and the shoemaker's apprentice looked at you like you'd grown a second head. Now you just say very well and nod. You nod a lot. Sometimes, though, they still look at you sideways. Maybe it's your hands, too clean, too soft. Maybe it's the way you flinch when someone coughs. Maybe it's that you never seem to know where you're going. But more and more, those looks are fleeting. People have better things to worry about than your weirdness, the weather, the bishop's new decree, the rising cost of barley. You're not their problem. You're barely their curiosity. You take that as a victory. You've even found a rhythm to your days. Wake before the bells. Join the line at the friary for watered-down broth. Avoid eye contact with the man who once offered to sell you his wife's hair. Help unload crates at the docks in exchange for half a fish. Return it when you realise it's more maggot than fish. Try again at the baker's. Fail to haggle. Settle for crusts. Eat while sitting on a step, pretending you're just between things. Smile once when a child drops a turnip and you catch it before it hits the mud. Give it back. She looks at you like you gave her gold. You feel a little more human. You've even gotten used to the smells. Well, not used to, but you've stopped retching. You no longer cover your nose when passing the tannery. You no longer dry heave when the wind carries the scent of the latrines uphill. You don't gag at the sight of dead animals being flayed in the open air. Now you just squint and walk faster. Progress. Someone calls you pilgrim. It's the first time anyone has said it without skepticism. They ask where you're headed. You reply, Santiago. Then you add, eventually. They nod. Everyone says eventually. They offer you a crust of bread. You thank them in the local dialect. It's the wrong verb tense, but close enough. You're invited to sit. You do. For an hour, you're not an outsider. You're just another traveller. Someone with sore feet and no coin and stories you're not quite ready to tell. You sit with your back against a wall, eating stale bread beside someone whose name you didn't catch. You share a silence that isn't awkward. You listen to church bells. You watch chickens fight in the mud. You could almost believe you belong here. Almost. But you don't. You miss your shoes. You miss ice. You miss toothpaste and proper bandages. And being able to say, I'm hungry, without fearing you'll be robbed or pitied. You miss being understood. Not just your words, but your world. The way people used to talk about movies, about weekends, about grocery stores and car trouble and birthday plans. Here, everything is about survival. And survival doesn't have room for small talk. Still, you've adapted, you blend, you survive. You've learned that disappearing isn't just a trick, it's a skill. And tonight, as you curl up in the corner of a friary storeroom, clutching a half-rotted blanket and the last crumb of someone else's kindness, you almost feel like part of the century. You'll never belong. But for now, you are tolerated. And in the Middle Ages, that's the closest thing to peace. You lie awake on a pile of straw that generously calls itself a bed. Your feet are still filthy. Your tunic clings to your back with the texture of wet burlap. The air is thick, not with warmth, but with that uniquely medieval perfume. Wood smoke, sweat, and the faintly sour tang of rotting vegetables from the alley outside. You roll onto your side and try to find a spot that doesn't stab you with a straw stalk or brush against the wall, crawling with something that probably has legs. You close your eyes. You try to imagine home. Not a person, not a place. A faucet. A silver, modern, blessed faucet that pours out cold, clean water whenever you ask. You think about brushing your teeth. You think about flushing toilets. You think about deodorant, shampoo, antibacterial soap. You think about socks. And then the rooster crows. You groan, a sound you now share in common with every groaning joint in your body, and sit up. It's morning. Again. Somehow, you're still here. Let's take stock. You've survived. Maybe not thrived, maybe not passed as a local, but you've made it through days of filth, fear, fever, and failure. You've scavenged food, faked Latin, invented a backstory, buried your technology, avoided execution so far, and discovered that you can in fact sleep through bells, fleas, and curfew patrols. But not all three at once. At this point, the question isn't just how do you survive? It's how do you stop yourself from going insane? Medieval life isn't just hard, it's relentless. It doesn't care if your muscles hurt, or if your dignity took a punch that morning. There's no reset button, no weekend, no therapist to unload on. There's only survival, and then more of it. You've learned the rhythms now. The sound of morning prayer bells from the church tower. The way bread smells when it's 3 days from edible. The way to nod just enough to be polite, but not enough to look servile. The way people speak when they're not sure you belong, but don't care enough to ask. The town has accepted you in the only way medieval towns accept anyone, by ignoring you unless you mess up. And you've come close. A few times, too close. That moment when the priest asked where your relic was. That time you almost said okay instead of very well. That time you pronounced Ave Maria like a tourist ordering tapas. But each time you adapted. You learned the rule that isn't written down anywhere. Don't be memorable. If people remember you, you're suspicious. If they forget you, you're safe. You've become a walking blur. Just another traveller. Just another tired face in the market. You've also learned to live without. No forks. No change of clothes. No privacy. No expectation of comfort. The most advanced thing you own is a rusted knife and a second-hand sense of danger. Your favourite meal this week was pottage with visible beans. Your proudest moment was successfully not vomiting after drinking water from a bucket that had, until 5 minutes earlier, been used to soak feet. Your deepest moment of joy was washing your face in a clean stream and realizing it didn't burn. And somewhere along the way, your body began to adjust. The blisters hardened. The nausea faded. Your ears began to recognize the rhythm of the local dialect. Your eyes adjusted to candlelight. You even started to forget what your phone looked like. There are things no one tells you about time travel, like how boredom becomes a kind of parasite, gnawing at your skull in the slow hours between meals and chores. Or how hard it is to go a full week without seeing glass, hearing music, or laughing at something on purpose. Or how much of the world used to be lived in silence. No hum of electricity, no engines, just fire, bells, footsteps and voices. Always voices. And how some part of you, some strange unevolved sliver of your brain, begins to like it. Not the filth, not the hunger, but the stillness, the clarity, the way that life here strips itself down to raw need. Eat, sleep, work, survive. You think less about emails, less about bills, less about the passive chaos of your own timeline. You think more about the next bowl of soup, the weather, and the man in the corner who's been eyeing your coin pouch too long. But don't get too romantic about it. This isn't a noble past. It's just a hard one. You've seen too many coughs that didn't get better. Too many children carrying loads twice their weight. Too many bent backs. Too many blank stares. Too many quiet exits. You understand now, in your bones, that most people didn't live history. They just survived it. Night falls again. You lie on your straw mat, slightly less itchy, slightly more resigned. You hear the familiar shuffle of shoes on stone outside the friary walls. You listen for anything suspicious, just footsteps, fading. You pull your cloak tight. You press your pouch to your chest. You mumble the beginning of a prayer you don't believe, just in case someone's listening. Tomorrow will be the same. Cold, hungry, confusing. But tonight you are not dead. And that, in medieval England, is enough.